All right, everybody, just want to make sure we have permission to record. If not, if you could please speak up or message me in the chat. Otherwise, if you can give a verbal yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Fine.
Okay, thank you. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marilyn Loyola. I'm Associate Professor of Spanish here at RU, and together with Dr. Orhan Erdem, Associate Professor of Finance, who's also on the Zoom call today, we organized the Brown Bag series. Thank you especially to Nicole Riley and Lauren Perko for their help in organizing the online hosting of today's presentation. It's our honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the first Brown Bag event of the academic year, and especially to welcome and introduce our guests of honor today, Dr. Kristen Ravel and Dr. Kyle Stedman. Kristen Ravel earned her PhD in Composition and Rhetoric from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Before coming to RU, she coordinated first-year composition at UWM, a role that involved curriculum development, program assessment, and faculty training. Her research and teaching specialties include first-year writing and the ethics of composing technologies, including social media, and draws from feminist theory, digital media studies, and multimodal rhetoric. She's also earned her LGBTQ and inclusivity workshop certificate in 2018. Professionally, her writing has appeared in Composition Studies, Bedford Bits, and the Sweetland Digital Writing Collaborative. Kyle Stedman is Associate Professor of English at Rockford University, where he serves as Chair of the English Department and Director of the Writing Center. He teaches first year and upper level rhetoric, professional writing, creative nonfiction, and sonic composition. His co-written textbook on using audio recording in rhetoric classrooms is under contract with Broadview Books. Congratulations, Dr. Stedman. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ravel and Dr. Stedman, who will present on the rhetoric sequence and first year writing at RU.
Hi, everyone. As Marilyn already just introduced us, my name is Kristen Ravel, and I'm going to kind of begin by introducing our different roles as part of the first year rhetoric sequence. And actually, I'm sorry, I forgot that we added the slide, Kyle.
No, that's okay. I'll say really fast before everyone put a parenthesis in your head. I know this is different than some of the brown bags. We're not like presenting on our research in a formalized way. And yet as we talked about it, we thought we wanted to do this for these two reasons you're seeing here. Partly rhetoric classes are big here. You know, we have 20 plus sections across the three classes every single semester. You know, there's 10 101s right now. There's 8 351s. There's 3 102s. So we figured it's something that we constantly kind of get little questions about. What is this? What do you guys do? What's your purpose? So part of it is just to clear that up, just to let you know that we're always open for those conversations. But also, of course, we're hoping this trickles into ongoing conversations about writing across the curriculum. We hope that everyone will teach writing in some way that works for your field. And maybe the more that we have shared language and shared assumptions and you kind of know what we're doing in 101, the better. So that's what we're getting at.
And as part of that introduction to what the RET sequence, we wanted to kind of talk about our different roles in the department, because those have kind of shifted, you know, here and there through time, and as Kyle took up the chair position. And so I wanted to let you all know, like, what is it exactly that I do and what is it exactly that Kyle does. And so I'm the writing program administrator. So oftentimes that gets abbreviated in composition rhetoric as WPA. So if you ever see WPA, that's usually what it means in my field. So a lot of the work that I do goes into planning and conducting the RET sequence assessment. So we just started some new assessment procedures over the summer where we collectively read students' work and assessed it according to the AACU value rubric, all in a room together. We started doing some more organized training for faculty. I'm doing observations of all adjunct RET faculty and then meeting with them and writing observation letters for them. I'm also trying to make sure that there's opportunities for continued rhetoric faculty development. So sharing conference opportunities, especially free conferences, resources, materials, just to help all of our instructors stay up to date on the scholarship within rhetoric studies. And we're doing a optional mid-semester reading group for Rhet faculty over the winter break too. So if anyone's interested in joining in on reading some Rhet materials, Rhet books, let me know and we can be part of our reading group over winter break. The other two things that I'm going to focus on, this is kind of mostly, I think, the meat of the presentation, is the philosophy of our program that was just revised over the summer to be more in line with current Rhet scholarship, and also just a overview of the new curriculum in Rhet 101, which I'm hoping you'll be able to trickle into your courses in your own way, depending on your discipline, as Kyle was saying. So those last 2 points, in terms of my role, are the things that we're going to focus and spend more time on.
I don't have as much to say about who I am. You know, I'm still figuring out how to be a department chair, like texting Bill every week. How do I do this? But I did want to clarify that the way that, maybe this is too much in the weeds, the way that course releases have changed in our department has changed, and I really think for the better. In the past, English had a course release for chair and a course release for writing center director, but we've changed that so that now we still only have 2 course releases, but one as chair and one for Kristen as WPA. I'm going to continue to direct the writing center as like a separate stipended position, but what that lets us do is it lets us see Kristen really as almost a co-chair. I mean, honestly, if you think of how many English classes get offered for majors, maybe 6 or something ENGL classes versus the 21 Rhet classes over there, Rhet sections. There's a sense in which, as the director of a program, we're trying to see each other more as equals, and what that lets her do is helps us do better by updating our program, making sure that we're in line with best practices across universities. It lets us do assessment better and things like that, instead of me as chair kind of trying to squeeze everything in. So we're really excited about the way things are splitting up here a little, and the way that we can keep collaborating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like so often, I'll just add on that role of administrator, you often think of as it being kind of just in the weeds of the program, but the administration, at least from the writing program administrator standpoint, is just as much about staying on top of current trends in research and scholarship. So a lot of it is just me trying to stay on top of everything that's been changing. And there's been a lot of conversations going on, which I'll bring up some in terms of comp rep pedagogy and how to best teach writing, that I'm trying to fold into our program and just stay on top of things.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first things that we started doing was when we were talking about the website and the English department and some of the revisions that we could do to it. And I noticed that we didn't actually have a philosophy. And one of the things that a lot of other schools have, and I'll go ahead and bring this up. I'll share these slides with you all so you have access if you want to browse through this later. But I wrote a general writing sequence philosophy that kind of centered the main transformations, changes that seem to be important to make for the Rhet sequence and for all the students who are going through these courses. So some of those are things that we'll talk about in more detail over the presentation, but just making sure rhetoric is at the center. You're always considering the audience, purpose, and context that you're writing for, and there's not really a good or bad concept of writing unless you consider the context that you're writing for. Recognizing and respecting linguistic diversity, embracing multimodal meaning making, and a commitment to continued learning. And then there's some course goals here. So we started off just kind of being like, what were the main changes we want to make? And eventually we're going to publish this up on the website in hopes that we can use this as a reference to our students. And maybe it's even something that can kind of trickle into other courses across the campus. So I'll just cover these other changes we made briefly, because I think that the latter part of this presentation is more important. One thing, considering that, nearly all freshman students are taking Rhet 101 or Rhet 102, we really started to think about retention and strategies that we could work toward retaining our students. And so one of the first easy things to do was work with open access free text to teach writing, as opposed to making students buy textbooks. So I was able to do a bunch of research and uncover text that would work in our classes that all RET instructors can incorporate. Oops, I'm sorry. I don't know why it went like way ahead. We also made it so that each RET sequence was kind of themed in some way. So there's the RET content, like how to teach writing. I think of that as being the container, and then the theme is what gets put in the container for students to be able to work through these concepts and ideas about writing that will hopefully transfer to other areas of their college experience. And I also revisited the sequence to ensure that each unit, so each assignment that gets assigned, is intentionally and explicitly built on the other, so that writing and reading practices can be applied in a new context and relearned at a deeper level. I've done this for 101 so far. My goal is to get that done for 102 so we can develop that reading as well. So that's some of the stuff going on in the background. If you want to look at the syllabus template, which I created for all RET instructors to be able to use and kind of fill in their own information with, you can look at that. I don't know, Kyle, did you want to say anything about the syllabus template at all?
No, I guess the goal here is that if you've been here for a while, you know that there's always a degree to which there's always a tension between the cohesion between a given RET class and the individual ways that a individual instructor teaches it. And that's still a tension that's healthy, I think. You know, we want people to follow their hearts. I would say that the revisions we're moving towards are more towards cohesion. You'll see in a couple slides, there are more and more things that we're hoping that every single student who gets out of RET 101 will have had some practice in. And again, that's part of what led to this, is we want you to know, hey, just so you know, if you have a first year student and they're in 101 here, they probably have been talking about this. So we want to give you some vocabulary about that. And this standard syllabus template is one of the ways we're starting to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We keep hinting at what's coming ahead, but it's not like it's going to change your mind. Oh, well. Foreshadowing.
I will bring this up. I also made a standardized instructor-facing calendar. This is really important because in our sequence, I'm sure, and this is the case with a lot of departments, but we often will hire adjuncts who, like we hired, a new adjunct this summer who only had 2 weeks to kind of prepare to teach RET 101. And so, we're thinking about RET 101 as being such an important class. I always view it as a really important class because we're working with freshman students, and often students who are just kind of becoming familiar with what the college landscape is like and what the expectations are. And so I see RET 101 as a bridge that kind of invites students to participate at the thinking, writing, and other expectations of working within a college curriculum. And so a lot of the work that I did making this calendar was actually, I think Ron's on the call. I had a lot of conversations and emails back and forth with Ron Lee talking about what did you do in first year seminar? What can we do in RET 101 to help reinforce those points or kind of build on those points? And so I created this over the summer, and it basically gives an idea of what to assign, what to do in the class each day, breaks down, a general lesson plan, so that when we are in those instances where we do need to hire an adjunct last minute, there is something that they can work with and build from and kind of make their own, right? I'm not expecting them to stick with this specific layout every day, but it can just show you an example of some of the ways that I've kind of brought that research into how the curriculum is getting developed and really how we can create more cohesion, which is a really big goal here. So you can look at that in your own time. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I think that it's allowed for our RET courses to have some more interesting discussions, like through email threads. Like people will be like, oh, I did this for this activity. And there's just more pedagogical sharing and resource sharing than there was before, which at least for me, it seems like it's a positive effect on just the community at large. Like I feel more connected to other teachers who are teaching this than I did before.
And I think this next slide really shows some of those specifics. For instance, I've taught RET 101 for years, but this is the first semester that I've really worked in specific time planning things for students. And I think sometimes I feel like I'm babying them. I'm like, oh, I don't want to be like, hey, report on how you're keeping track of things. Hey, let me pause 5 minutes before the end of class so you can write stuff in your calendar. But more and more I'm thinking, if not in Rhet 101, where? That's not to say that stuff can't and shouldn't happen in first year SEM too. I think it does and it should. But you don't learn something by just hearing someone tell you to do it once and walking away. You learn something by repeated action with coaches, people walking you through. Again, same with note taking. Until this semester, I've kind of asked students to take notes. I've given a couple examples, but this is the first semester where I've regularly, every time I give a writing assignment, I say, hey, a reading assignment, I say, hey, read this and take notes. And then we ask to see them. We regularly go back to it and say, how are you doing? Are you using a digital tool? Let me see your iPad. Are you printing? Whoa, let me show you what we do printing. So again, we're saying this not to be like, we're so great. I mean, we're making this up as we go in some ways, but we want to encourage you to do this. Ask your first year students how their time management going, how they're note taking, how they're summarizing. I said time management right now, but not just time management, the labor management that we've been talking about too. How are they managing all of their energies that are going so many places? You can see on there, there's some stuff about conventions and also citations, not just as like the dumb rule my teacher's doing. We're really trying to more and more from the beginning talk about a citation as a design choice, as an ethical choice, as a contextual choice. How and why are you citing? What is that helping you do? Where does that go on your page? And how is that similar to the kinds of questions you would have when you choose what font and images and layout to use? How is, in other words, the citation part of how you present it to your audience? And the second we're asking them to start thinking about presenting to an audience, the more we're helping flesh out what rhetoric is, all of the things we do to communicate effectively in our given context, whether it's for class or whether it's hopefully for anything else.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, there's been so many times where I'm like, oh no, I'm babying students. Oh no, they're gonna think this is dumb and like wasting time, and they already have these strategies. But every time they surprise me with how grateful they are that we just talked about how are you keeping time and sharing, having space to be able to share those ideas. And even with note taking, one student was like, well, I didn't really get a lot out of the assignment. And then like the next unit, I was like, oh, your notes have really shifted and changed. Why is that? And they're like, well, I realized like I was taking notes like a high schooler and I needed to start taking notes like a college student. And so they can kind of see and just better know the expectations and how they're in a different context now, and they need to transform as much as the environment around them has changed, right? And just giving them some really solid skills to work with. And one of the other things that I almost thought was babying until I started teaching it explicitly was this idea of summarizing and actually slowing down and teaching. How do you listen to what another text is saying, whether it's an academic reading or whether it's a textbook reading or whether it's a TED Talk or video you're listening to? How can you slow down and really pay attention to what is the purpose of this? What is it communicating? What are the main ideas here? And being able to reiterate that back to another through their own writing, that is something that I think a lot of students really, really struggle with, and they haven't explicitly been taught in their K-12 education. Summary is almost like a given. Like people just assume people have been taught how to summarize well, and it really is a skill. So getting them to slow down and listen to the different texts that they have in their the number of different classes they're in, and being able to reiterate that as a study skill and as a writing skill is something that we've been trying to establish in these courses as well.
This slide is in some ways kind of a continuation of that second one of our big purposes. That, hey, here's some language and things that we're using that maybe you could think about too. I don't want to read the slide at you. Maybe if I had to say the thing that matters most here to me personally is this one on the left, the idea of talking about purpose for assignments. Of course, sometimes we're asking students to write something just as an exercise because we believe that writing it out and maybe even revising it, talking about it with a peer, talking about it with an instructor, we know that will help them learn the material in some new way, right? It'll sink in a realer way. but I think it's really easy to forget to tell them that. It's easy to forget to tell students what purposes we've built into assignments, and how awesome then if we've done that a little bit to give them some free rein, to ask them to write something where we didn't quite lay out exactly what the purpose was, but we asked them to choose what the purpose is and say, hey, we want you to practice some communication and we want you to do it. And then we want you to defend all of the different things you did that helped you achieve that purpose. And of course, all those things can be big and small. They can be, well, I use this kind of language because for this audience, for what I'm trying to achieve, they needed to see me that way, or how I laid it out, or if it's a spoken or written or video thing, how they presented themselves in all those other ways. So I keep coming back to purpose as almost one of the key words that go across the entire rhetoric sequence. I know you all have plenty of purposes when you teach various things in your class, but let me encourage you as much as possible. Be explicit about that.
And I'll just jump in and say there are 4 units in the RET sequence, and you can look at the calendar and see exactly what those units are if you're or the syllabus if you're interested. But each of they're writing in different genres for different reasons in each of those 4 units. But each of those we use the terms purpose, evidence, and style. So if you can consider how your rubrics, your means of writing can kind of translate into those terms, that might be something that's familiar to them that can help them transfer what they're doing in RET 101 to the writing that they do across all other academic contexts at the college level. And I'll jump in and I'll jump in and explaining this slide. So one of the goals, this goes back to our philosophy, was recognizing, respecting linguistic diversity. And so some of the questions, these are some of the major questions and concerns that have been brought up in writing program administration, is how can we invite and respect linguistic diversity in our classes instead of constantly demanding standard American English, which is very white centered. And so some questions that could get students and yourself thinking about the ways that this kind of topic relates to or is situated in your classes is, how could you address the politics involved in the dominant languaging norms in your field or in your course or your assignments? What opportunities are there to read and analyze text that feature diverse voices and ways of speaking and writing in your courses? I'm just going to slow down. I'm going to explain these. I usually don't like reading from the slides, but I think that these are important questions and ones that I'm constantly thinking about. So that's a little side note. How may your prompts and assignments better support students' already existing talent, languaging, and gifts instead of seeing any writing outside of white standard English as a deficit in some way? And what readings, academic or otherwise, could demonstrate or model a code meshing while still communicating the learning in your courses? And code meshing is that combining of multiple dialects within a single context of communication. And I'd be happy to, if anyone is interested in integrating any of these types of ideas or questions into your curriculum, I'd be more than happy to help direct you to resources or other folks who are doing this work in your field if you kind of have some questions about it. But I think that this is part of campus-wide anti-racist efforts as much as it is about thinking about how is it that we teach writing and how dominant languaging norms kind of contribute to racism within our social structures.
And I'll just say that I think some of that starts by educating ourselves. You know, I was embarrassingly old before I realized how many actual real grammatical rules there are in all kinds of different voice dialects, you know, in African American language, but other dialects too, where it's not just a dialect, it's actually a language with consistent rules. So that you start to realize, the more you read, the more you study the stuff, that it's not a lessening of standards as people sometimes think when you start to recognize linguistic diversity. It's a realizing how much code meshing and how much multilingualism people already have, and that's really cool journey to go on. That's part of what we read for our winter break book last year.
Yeah, and even with STEM fields, I know that sometimes it's like, well, STEM is outside of these concerns, but even with STEM, you kind of have to acknowledge that there's racialized knowledge already built into the curriculum by virtue of who's been excluded in the past. And so inviting students to think about those issues in whatever context you can, whether that's thinking about, I don't know, scientists of color or women scientists, LGBTQ scientists, and thinking what their contributions have been and maybe how they've been erased through history could be one way of approaching that.
Okay, so this is our last content slide. So in just a minute, we are gonna hope to have a lot of time to hear what questions you have, whether more about what we do in case that will help, or more just talking about writing or teaching and writing. So just so you know, that's coming. This is in some ways a parallel to the last class, another possibility for kind of expanding on the philosophy in both for us and for you. In other words, we're one of our four main things for our philosophy is to expand how we think about multimodal meaning making. And that word multimodal, does that make sense? It's if you think of all the different modes of communication, how if you have something you want to say, you can kind of encode it into words or into images or into gestures or through sound or through even like space and architecture. There's all these ways you can try to communicate your message. So when we say let's embrace multimodal communication, we're really saying let's embrace the full range of the ways that we can communicate and the ways that we can craft communication for a purpose for an audience. And usually those modes of communication interlap in some way. They're multimodal because there's multiple ones happening at once. I've been teaching a graduate class on this with high school teachers, and it's so fun. It's a class called Intro to Multimodal Composition. I've never taught it before, and they're all coming in as people. Many of them have taught high school English for 20 years, and we're grappling with what is an English department supposed to be, both at the college level and at the high school level. Is our realm, is what we have to say, is it entirely about words on the page? And should students be taught entirely to write words on the page? That starts to get harder and harder to defend when you start thinking about all the ways people are communicating and all the ways that employers want people who can communicate in many rich ways, both digitally and face-to-face out loud, and presentations, and writing, and reports, but also just as a way to be human, right? We all love to consume media in so many forms, and there's something really special about getting better at practicing communicating in all those forms. So I don't know, you all know all this already, but the idea of constantly asking ourselves, how can we work this into class? Just one super small, simple example that I'm going to start doing more and more is if I have an assignment that I feel like ought to be in writing, I'm like, maybe I should allow students to respond to this in a multimodal way. No, I really need for my outcomes here for them to practice to write an essay, say. I'm more and more asking them to use multimodal means, non-written ways to reflect on that writing. Maybe to make a short selfie video saying, where they make a screencast and they talk over their essay. They say, let me show you what I did here and why I did that here. Let me show you what I did at the end and why I did it that way at the end. There are other times where it's appropriate to flip that, where I could say, hey, let me teach you how to make a video, and let's practice your video through multiple steps, and that should be the core, and maybe you'll write about the choices you made in writing in words. Who knows? There's a lot of options here, but the idea of kind of flipping up the mode based on the kind of thing I'm asking students to do is I think a really easy way to start folding some of this in if you feel like it's worthwhile. We can talk later if you want about all the various reasons it could be useful what scholars are saying, but I think I'm going to be quiet and move on, partly because I see Orhan's hand.
I was going to say, Orhan has a question. Do you want to wait until the end, or do you want to field questions as you go?
We can field questions as we go.
I think we are at the end, right? The end. Isn't that our next slide?
It's about 12:30 right now, but you can manage the next 20 minutes as you'd like. So
Yeah.
This might sound stupid. I'm sorry if it is.
No.
It might be out of context.
No.
But almost in all of my classes, I ask students to come up with a recent news from financial markets and then share it with the class. Sometimes I ask them to write short essays about those. And they know how to cite but it's interesting that it's very rare that students find really reliable resources to share the news.
Mm.
Like you might prefer CNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street, whatever, I don't care. But most of, especially in undergrad classes, I'm not talking about grad classes, undergrad classes, they generally find resources from Snapchat, Twitter, and then there is no resource at all. So somebody says this, somebody said that. So is it a common problem in writing, or is it something that I observe, especially in my case? I'm not sure if it is out of context. I'm sorry.
I think I would lean more on Kristen because she's more of the social media person here.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think this kind of goes back to the question of purpose and context and audience that we're talking about as language that we could bring into the RET course in terms of our assignments. And one of the things that students often don't understand is what makes a good resource in one context may not make a good resource in another context. So having, sorry, there's something weird going on with my screen. So being able to slow down and explain to students what the expectations of these research, the research you're doing in your course, and maybe even how that might differ from the popular methods of research that they do in their day-to-day lives might be something that could be worth slowing down and explaining. And I haven't revamped the 102 curriculum yet, but one of the things that I'm hoping to do is integrate the use of something called the BEAM framework, which is a way of seeing sources that provide background information, evidence, argument source, or a method source. So sources could be split into 4 different categories, right? Providing background, evidence, method, or argument. And one of the things that I've often seen students kind of grapple with when they start just researching is what not only is what source should I be using, but what should the source be doing? And so if they're not exactly certain what the purpose of the source is doing, then it makes a lot of sense that they would turn to the readings and texts that they're exposed to every day as kind of a go-to, as opposed to being like, oh wait, I'm writing a paper in this particular context and for this academic audience. And so that's going to require a different skill set, different resources than what I would use if I was trying to communicate to my peers or communicate in some activist circles I'm part of, or, you know, name another context that students could be involved in. Thanks for sharing that, Kyle.
It's also true that to your question, Orhan, yes, of course, I students and me, we all go to the easiest, not easiest, you know, but the things that we know, the styles we have. A short story that will sound like it's not answering your question, but it reminds me of in my RET 351 this semester. Well, in the past, I've asked students in RET 351 to find a peer-reviewed source on a topic of their choice, read it and use it in their final essay. And I found that students were constantly choosing very difficult sources. They were finding sources that no way they could understand. It was written for other scholars, it was outside of their field. They didn't even understand the abstract. So this year I said, you know what? I'm going to start by, I'm still going to ask them to do that, but I'm going to teach them earlier. I'm going to give them a list of 18 essays that I've pre-read or pre-skimmed that all can be found in our library databases. I'll ask them to find them using the database to give some practice. And then they have to do a series of assignments based on that one that they chose. So they got to choose it, but they chose it out of my list. And the responses are still, Dr. Stedman, I'm freaking out. This is the hardest reading I've ever done. This doesn't make sense. What is this? I don't even get it. Even though we've talked and practiced a lot about kind of how to read hard text. Has kind of been the theme of my 351 these days. You know, what do you do when you're freaking out? And I think sometimes my assumptions are too high. Does that make sense? I think, oh yeah, they kind of probably know some of these terms. They probably have faced hard things before. But I think when I actually force them to slow down and kind of through multiple assignments prove that they've read things carefully, getting into the more academic side of things is a huge hurdle for so many students. And I need to always remember that. I know news isn't the same, but I wonder if it feels similar to them. I'm just guessing, you know, but I wonder if pulling a news story that they saw in a more casual place, turning to a more credible place, I wonder if that almost feels like a similar hump. Like, I don't know how to do that, so I'll just go away from it. I'm guessing.
Well, thank you. I got the idea at least.
We won't have that long answers to every question.
I did a similar activity in my class last week where I had them evaluate. It was an evaluation of sources workshop where it was a blog entry written by a PhD in film studies and a scholarly article written by a different PhD in film studies, right? So same field, same preparation.
Cool.
Ground, and I had them do all sorts of things like what are three things they have in common, what are three things that are different, what are some key quotes, and then they had to identify audience, purpose, and forgot what the third thing was, but anyway, so in other words, they were kind of like going back and forth between them and trying to figure out what are the automatic things the signposts that within a few minutes you can scan a source without reading it completely and say this is a scholarly source and this one is not. They're both useful, but one of them is going to be useful for this kind of thing, to Kristen's point, and the other one's going to be useful for this kind of thing, but they both can contribute to an essay about, if they're talking about the same movie, which they were, right? They both can be useful. It's just how are you using them and what are their goals and things like that. So
and
be like a good way, I think, for students to get at it without feeling like scared.
And I hope the scientists aren't mad at me for this, but I've done similar assignments with using like a science website. I've used Science Daily before because it's a site that takes new research and boils it down into like a popular everyday sort of thing, and then ask them to try to find or open up the actual scientific paper it's based on to get an idea of like what makes academic writing. Of course, across fields, it's totally different in so many ways. And yet there are some, they can get used to, this is how citations work. This is the general structure of many kinds of academic writing in many fields. So some of those things they could start to notice. That's really anything that we could help them identify that moves an author made as rhetorical choices that fit their context is always good. What else is on your mind?
Is there a way so you both have shared sources, and Kristen, thank you for sharing the slides that accompany your presentation, but I feel like this is especially important for all faculty and staff to have access to. And of course, how this works with first year seminar is really critical to what we're all doing with retention and stuff like that. But is there a way that we can, and it could be like, I don't know, on the writing, I imagine this is going to be connected to the writing center information or the writing intensive, all of that, portal presence. But I wonder if there's a way to make it so that some of these tools are really accessible. If someone isn't able to access the brown bag or something like that, or may not know that the recording exists or something, I'll do what I can to make sure that they do, but just in case.
I don't want to answer too many things, but Kristen and I worked over the summer. We have a pretty robust Google Doc of changes we want to make to the public facing English department site. There are 3 pages on there right now about the rhetoric sequence, but some of them are out of date. They're missing our philosophy. They're missing some of these changes and updates. So I think we're thinking of a lot of this as kind of being refocused for that web audience there. Sure. Partly just so if people are Googling, hey, well, how are people teaching writing at Rockford University? They'll be able to find it without having to go to the portal. So we're not there yet. We have a draft. I have to get around to cleaning it up and getting it on there, but that's one short answer. It's not the full answer. Yeah. But you're right. I have people all the time say, this feels really bad, but I'm telling my students to take rhetoric, but I don't know what rhetoric is. And the answer is always, that's awesome. Let's talk about it. That sounds fun. It's it's fine.
The thing is that I think that there are so many strategies, pedagogical strategies and approaches that we can take. And a lot of these are new and up and coming that we may be kind of stuck in a rut and not know that they exist or something like that. And so just having a really, maybe one slide or two slides, like here are some things you can be doing if you're having students write in your classes, which so many of us do. And it's not part of, a general education requirement. It's not necessarily part of the first year seminar course or a writing sequence course or anything. So anyway, thank you.
No, thanks.
Kyle and Kristen, thank you so much for the work you're doing on the program. I think it looks great. And today in my first year seminar, I had a student say how much she has enjoyed in her rec class the ability to write about topics that interest her and not just, she said, she compared it to high school where everybody does the same, does the same thing. So it was very positive feedback. I'm wondering if in your first, month and a half or so of school, if you're seeing some problems or difficulties students are having when it comes to writing that we could be aware of and we could work on or help them with. I mean, I know, Kristen, you mentioned being able to summarize the main idea of a piece of writing. That's helpful.
That's a good question. I'm also looking around. I'm like, okay, how many people in this room teach Rhet? We could all answer this.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an answer to that. And it's not, for me, when I'm teaching my classes and I'm thinking about the students who are struggling the most, so often it's not an issue of writing or intellect or a lack of skills or being able to interpret what I'm saying and what I'm asking for. So often it's the outside context. It's the things that I am unable to control as an instructor that's impacting my students' ability to get their work done, get it in following the basic guidelines of the assignment. So it's really hard for me to ask that question because what I often tell my students, I'm not looking for you to come in here as perfect. No one's a perfect writer. Often we say, who thinks they're a good writer? No one raises their hand. and I don't raise my hand either because I'm like, no, who really thinks they're a good writer? There's always room for improvement. And what I'm seeking, what I'm hoping from all of you is that you can look at where you came in at week 1, you can look at where you came in 16, and you feel a sense of progress, growth, transformation, and new skills that you can bring to your futures in however way you're going to compose and communicate to others. And so it's not so much here's this issue, it's family emergencies, it's working 4 jobs, it's those things. It's insecurity, it's deep anxiety, depression, and other psychological struggles that seems to be getting in the way of the student's ability to grow in my class as opposed to the actual content of the class.
I was thinking the exact same thing. I was thinking of stories like that. Sorry, did I cut you off? I thought you were done.
I was done.
Well, I thought of a student who he joined the class late, on the last possible day of ad drop, and we had already, on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, we had already had 3 days of class and 2 days of homework. So he's felt behind the whole time, and he turned the first full draft of his first essay in a week later than everyone else. And I kept asking for it. I kept like, hey, when is this going to happen? If you're going to turn something in, tell me. Let's have a plan. And when I read it, and I was making a short video response to it, like a screencast, where I was like, hey, here's kind of the ways that I think you're on the right track and ways that I would cut that. You were just spinning your wheels there. I haven't seen his response yet, but I hope as I was responding, I was trying to find this way to kind of, how do I say this? I want to have a high standard in the sense of I want him to know that he can do better. But I also wanted to encourage him and not make him feel more anxiety or fear about this class that so many people have. It's like, you've been told your whole life probably that you're a bad writer, but now you've got a draft and you've got some feedback from me. let's step forward. And if I see a student like that who then continues to back off, who never bothers to revise for whatever reason, maybe because he's busy, maybe because he's lazy, I don't know what it is. Those are the students who fail. Those are the problems. But if he'll, so I feel like he's at this crucial point. Like if he'll just like take my advice and try one more time, we can keep working. We can keep trying again and again and again, right? Like he will get better, and his essays will get better, and he'll feel better by the end of class, and then he'll go into 101 feeling like he can do this. So I really feel like he'll go into 102. So I really feel like 101, a lot of it for me is the touchy-feely. It's emotion management. It's helping them get past their writing anxiety. I do less of that in 102 and a lot less in 351, but it's almost half of what I have in mind in 101. I don't know, maybe, is that bad? That's how I feel.
I'll just jump into Ron, because you just reminded me, one of the things that we're really trying to do in 101 is reiterate the resources that are available on campus. So with if you go ahead and look at that, I've actually recommended like, hey, play this video in the Writing Center on writing anxiety. Play this video from the Writing Center on like what an appointment's like. I'm sure, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but I made like an RU resources guide that's student facing, and that's something that I've encouraged everyone to share week 1 and kind of go back to, throughout the semester. And alerting, another thing is like alerting students to workshops that are available that can help them, that are on campus, that can help them with, the other skills. So just connecting them to resources, letting them know what's available, being like, hey, this is what the Lang Wellness Center offers, and this is all available to you as a student at RU. You're not in this alone. There's a community here to support you. You just need to reach out.
Of course, they have writing problems too, right? But it's like
yeah.
We can deal with those, and they're so individualized. I can't think of a trend. I mean, like comma splices. They all have comma splices. We talk about that. That feels like 2 levels down. We can't talk about comma splices in a worthwhile way until we dig through some of the other stuff. I feel like we're at time. Oh, sorry. Maybe like one more.
One more question. Yeah, Bill raised his hand.
Sorry.
Physically.
Well, it's not really a question. And I'm sorry if you asked this. I had a student come in. This is my office hour too. But I think after last year, COVID, a lot of our students are coming to us that need all of the things that Kristen and Kyle are talking about in terms of your notes. This is how you need to time manage. Are you doing it? This is how it works. And those kinds of things. I think that we always need to do that, but it's especially true this semester, at least from my experience of what I'm seeing, and from seeing my own children at home with how last year went and their own schooling on Zoom.
Thanks, Bill. I think we should probably wrap up, let people get to their 1 o'clock stuff, unless you want to hang out, eat virtual lunch together.
Well, that sounds good. It is up to you all, but I think I may close our session for today, and then people can stay on after the recording is done. So thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Kyle, for this wonderful presentation. It's going to be incredibly useful to all of us, and especially to our students. And they're lucky to have you all leading the charge on this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you both. Bye-bye.